Welcome to another episode of A Mental Health Break. I'm your host and author of the book, Mr. Lanci Talks Mental Health, Vincent A. Lanci.
And I'm JC Pohl.
Welcome to the third episode of season 4, and we have an incredibly valuable episode ahead that will shed light on the student perspective of mental health. I would like to start this show with sharing why I started this platform. When I was 21 years old, I was the victim of a hit-and-run accident while on foot. After coming out of a coma and suffering from a traumatic brain injury, or you may know of as a TBI, I soon realized it was time to put my mental health on a very high pedestal. This transformative experience has led me to create this podcast that is all things mental health. It has also led me to create my new book, Mr. Lanci Talks Mental Health. Check it out after this episode ends. Would it add value to your life to hear mental health professionals and advocates share their authentic stories relating to mental health? If you answered yes, you came to the right place. I want to start by congratulating you for making your mental health a priority. Today's guest is someone who is on the season 2 premiere of my other podcast series, What It's Really Like to Be an Entrepreneur. He brings a unique perspective to the show as he is the founder of Teen Truth. He has helped over 10 million people in over 7,000 schools. He has produced groundbreaking programs such as Teen Truth, as I mentioned, and also Rising Up, along with award-winning content for companies such as Warner Brothers, ESPN, and Disney. He has continued to provide innovative educational content for the American Film Institute and also Human Relations Media. His school culture work with Teen Truth has sent him around the world, inspiring students, educators, and parents to tell hard truths and be the difference. To complement Teen Truth, he has also developed Rising Up, which is an SEL curriculum designed to teach students to build resiliency in the face of adversity. Now we're able to combine all of this value with JC also being a licensed marriage and family therapist, along with a 2-time author. Allow me to now introduce JC Pohl. JC, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, Vincent, it's an honor to be back on the show with you. Had a lot of fun in the last podcast we did on entrepreneurship, and very excited today to talk about mental health. It's a super important topic. So many of us, like you said, our kids and teenagers are struggling with it right now, just in life, but also, with COVID and everything that's kind of layered on top of things. And then, of course, for us as adults, it's an important subject that we always need to visit with. And I appreciate all of you for, tuning in today and listening to the show for sure. I hope you can find some value in it.
Absolutely will be some value in. I really appreciate you coming on the show, especially as males. It's very hard to find males using their voice, and that's not discounting any female story by any means. We are equally important to share because, like you said, with COVID going on right now, there's a lot of help needed. But would you mind please sharing your role relating to mental health? Introduce yourself a little more to our listeners before we dive in and get going.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of a crazy story. Like, never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd be here sitting with you today as a mental health professional. Like, that was not my goal growing up, and that's not my background. My background is actually as a filmmaker. I worked for many years for Warner Brothers and Disney, and I really loved it. Like, I love film, I love movies, and I just love story and character. And really, that was really my focus, like all through college and in the younger years of my career. But around that same time in my life, something happened here in America, kind of like COVID, something big that got everyone's attention. And that was the Columbine high school shooting. And when Columbine happened, that was many years ago, but I was about 22, 23 years old at the time. And my producing partner and I, we really thought that we had to do something about it. And one of the problems that we had was we'd turn on the news, we'd turn on CNN and Fox, and we'd always kind of see an adult telling us why Eric and Dylan did what they did. And we didn't see a lot of kids. And so we thought, we should understand what students and kids have to say about this issue. And so long story short is we ended up recruiting 5 students to film for us for an entire school year. And we made a movie called Teen Truth, which was just kind of this inside look into bullying and school violence. And the movie, it did really well. It broke records for our distributor and became one of the top selling anti-bully films in the country. And that allowed us to just kind of go down this crazy road making these films. We made films on drugs and alcohol and body image and self-esteem and parenting. We got films now on social media and academic pressure, but they're all kind of shot from the student perspective. And so we've been traveling the country basically ever since, hosting assemblies and leadership summits at the middle school and high school level, just around this idea of giving students a voice and kind of empowering them to use that voice, whether it's in their life to make a difference on campus or just to kind of really tell their truth. Like our underlying message has been like, hey, the kids in our movie, they told their truth. We're just wondering what your truth might be and what would change in your life if you could kind of talk about what you're going through. And so that took me away from Hollywood. I got to, reach that point where I finally got to quit my day job and moved out here to Austin, Texas. And one of the things that you might imagine, being on the road working with students is like, I kind of found myself in situations and in conversations where I didn't feel that comfortable, Vincent. I'd have students sharing with me about thoughts of suicide. I'd have them talking to me about them cutting themselves, and like this, they'd show me the scars on their arms, and they'd talk to me about the crazy, crazy situations they're dealing with at home. And like, man, I went to school for marketing, right? Like my goal in life was to work for Disney. Okay. And it wasn't comfortable for me. So many speakers travel the country and I feel like they don't always have the background to sometimes talk and have some of the conversations that they really get themselves into. And so I put the brakes on everything. I applied to Texas State out here to get my master's in professional counseling. And, by the grace of God, got the opportunity to go through that program. It took me about 5 or 6 years to get through it because I travel so much with Teen Truth, but I loved it. I loved every single minute of it. And as a counselor, I learned how to sit with those students that are struggling, how to sit with that 13-year-old girl and not be afraid of the fact that she's cutting herself and try to understand why. And try to understand that coping skill and help her replace it with a healthier coping skill. Or even now, how to sit with a couple on the edge of divorce, like willing and ready to give up on everything and trying to reconnect them and re-inspire them to move forward. And so now, here we are 20 years after Columbine, but now I'm a marriage and family therapist. I continue to kind of be the CEO here at Teen Truth. And we have a team that travels the country working in schools. But I also have a small private practice working with clients, primarily, like you said, teenagers. I do a lot of divorce recovery. And then I also work with couples who are, in conflict or struggling in their marriage. And so I believe that mental health is extremely important for all of us. And that's why I was so excited when you asked me or, gave me the opportunity to sit with you today.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for you coming on because of everything you just said. You have so many different areas you're going to give advice from, different experiences, and it's going to be a good one. Everybody listening on, definitely look into Teen Truth after the episode as well. It was a great episode on the Entrepreneurship Podcast because I remember it, still how much you wanted to work at Disney and then how things changed. It shows you with a little hard work, anything's possible. But I think with no further wait, we are going to hop into the main event here, JC.
Definitely.
On each episode, my guests and I go over this series of questions to help others improve their mental health. You ready to go?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm excited.
Me as well. So many would agree that the more common or at least talked about types of mental health disparities are mood disorders, anxiety disorders, and schizophrenia disorders. Now, through your experiences, which areas did you come across the most?
Yeah. Well, I think that the work that I do the most is what I call like situational mental health issues. And so usually I'm receiving a student or working with a student or an adult who's going through a situation that's causing some mental health issues. So the depression is kind of manifesting, the anxiety, the stress, the conflict, like I mentioned, that might be coming across in a marriage or relationship. And so I've been kind of like, I guess on that side of the mental health equation, like I don't tend to deal more with like the more clinical type of mental illnesses and things like that. I'm more, receiving students in like the general population of just people who are struggling. And what I found, Vincent, is like most people are struggling. We don't always talk about it though. We're really good at hiding behind a mask. You and I as guys, a lot of guys are really good at kind of like just pushing through and, cowboy up or whatever it takes to kind of get through something. And I found that behind the mask, a lot of us struggle from time to time, and it's just so important for us to kind of talk about that.
That's the thing too. no one was talking about it 20 years ago really at all. And it's been a slow but steady push to break these stigmas. And it comes up a lot too, where you break your hand, you're taking 2 months, for example, hypothetically. And why can't you do the same for if you need to work on your mental health? And I'm hoping that conversations like ours bridge that gap.
Yeah, I think, especially when it comes to mental health, like the word health really needs to be highlighted and underlined. It's like you said, like if you break your arm, you got to heal. But I also think about it like this morning, I was in the gym, like I'm going to the gym, I'm doing the same exercises, whatever, like doing the bicep curls, doing the leg lifts or whatever. It's like I'm putting that muscle through that work to get it stronger. And why would our mental health muscle not be similar? And what counseling and journaling and yoga and meditation and all these kind of things that can help with your mental health do is the exact same thing that dumbbell's doing when you do that curl. It's just kind of like strengthening that muscle and giving you that resiliency to work through whatever issue it is that you're kind of going through at the time.
I love that analogy, but you may have previewed it with your story on Columbine, but what was that exact moment when you said, I'm taking a stance on mental health advocacy or a career somewhat relating to mental health, whether it's counseling, whether it's the filmmaking? Please share that moment for us.
Yeah, definitely. We talked about this in the other podcast too. It's crazy how your career unfolds, when you're younger and I remember working at Disney and there was this guy, he was the VP in like the division that I was in, and his name was Gary, and he was a cool guy. And like, you just hear his stories, like how he was in the Navy and he did this and he did that. And now he's a VP at Disney. And as a 20-year-old, you're just like, how's that even possible? Because you think, oh man, for me to be a VP at Disney, I just got to work here for 20 years, right? But like your life kind of unfolds in ways that are really interesting. And there's so many different pathways to success. And I really backed into this opportunity to work with students. And I really found that was my passion and my love, was being on stage or doing a workshop, working with people. I love films and I love filmmaking, but I found that the actual act of producing a film a little boring. Like, I don't know if any of y'all have ever been on set, but man, it's like watching paint dry, Like I love the action of pulling the story together or pulling the financing together or working on the script. But the opportunity to work to do life with people and work with people who are going through some real stuff. And then our films are really good at kind of like sparking that conversation with kids and sparking that conversation with adults. That's when the flag went up for me. And I'm really serious in what I said. Like I have heroes I look up to, like Tony Robbins and some of these other great speakers. And, I know Tony's got his own unique background, but many of these speakers don't have like a specific credential or have gone and got like a master's degree to like be on stage talking about some of the issues that they deal with. And I didn't want to be one of those guys. And I really felt like I needed to like do the work. I needed to go get this master's degree to like have these conversations. And what it really did was it did exactly what you said. It made me more of an advocate for mental health, because I started to see how our work was tied to mental health. Like even if you look at Columbine, right? It's like you think about everything Eric and Dylan were going through, and it's like, could a counselor like me have broken through a little bit with them and maybe change their direction a little bit, or what was their mental health at the time? And you kind of see this yin and yang type of equation when you look at many of the events and situations that teenagers and adults get into. And so that's when the light bulb went off for me. And that's really when Teen Truth, when we kind of changed our direction a little bit. We started coming out of Columbine, we were really an anti-bully and school violence program. Like that was our thing. Like that was our niche. And once I kind of went to Texas State, I said, no, we got to change this thing. We got to work on school culture. We got to work on the social and emotional issues. We got to work on mental health. And so now we really do brand ourselves more as like this social emotional company that can come in and work on school culture and mental health. And bullying is just kind of like one component of what we do on campus. And so that's kind of like when I put the flag in the ground and I said, no, we're going to stand on stage and we're going to be mental health advocates, and we're going to be people that kind of lead in this part of the education industry. And I think myself, as well as our team, I mean, we have a fabulous team of speakers that, we're passionate about it and passionate about kind of modeling what that health looks like for teenagers, right? Like for us to go on stage and tell our truth, for us to show our films about other kids telling their truth, And then to just ask the question like, hey, I'm wondering what your truth is and what you're going through and what could change in your life if you could tell your truth. And I think that's the beginning of the mental health conversation, right?
Yeah, and incredible all around there. But what you said, could a counselor like me have helped them? It goes back to the stigma around this mental health, how health needs to be triple underlined, because that wasn't even probably a thought of any of this going on, why he did it. It probably wasn't. And now, thankfully, counselors play a much more active role in children coming up and all of the work you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, counselors and as well as teachers, we've really seen this with COVID. So many of our students are struggling right now with COVID. They're becoming disengaged, all those mental. And one thing I've come to realize with teachers in general is they really are the first line of defense for mental health for our students. If you think about it, like, yes, a student sometimes gets to a counselor or gets to a principal that can help, but it's the teacher that's kind of on the front lines working with them every day that can catch them in the classroom or catch them in the hallway or catch them on the basketball court or whatever, and have that critical conversation with them. Even it's funny, like I'll never forget coming off stage once. I was in Palm Springs and this guy came up to me and said, JC, like, he said, I loved everything you said, but I'm a math teacher. And he said, I don't really want to deal with this stuff. And like, it just sat with me because it was like, you know what? Like because I studied Eric a lot. I read a lot of his journals and books and all this. It's like, this dude was like, building bombs. He was building websites like barely before, you and I could build a website, right? He was on the fringe of all that stuff. And it's like, man, like what if the math teacher or the science teacher could have caught this kid, right, in the right place and changed his path a little bit? And so, I didn't think of it at the time when I was talking to the guy, but like, that's what sits with me now many years later was, man, it's like, you might not want to do this stuff as a math teacher, but maybe a kid like Eric would have connected with you, where a kid like me, I connected with my football coach. But all of us kind of have that charismatic adult that can really impact our life. And that's a huge component in, mental health for teenagers as well as us as adults, is having those key relationships where we can, get that inspiration and motivation and insight to help us work through these issues.
That's an incredible response. And it's the truth. You never know who's going to resonate with who can help somebody. You don't know until you offer that help or at least try. Great. What if the teacher did pay more attention? You're not just a math teacher. You're a role model. Some students don't have parents present in their lives. You're that parent for that 42 minutes. So great answer there, JC. But from your experiences again, what advice can you give to our listeners as what may be a potential early sign someone may be developing a mental illness?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. What I find is if you are feeling that you're struggling, is asking yourself why you're struggling. And so I think the best answer I can give is a little anecdotal story. Like, I remember this vividly. So I was dating someone. She actually was bipolar and struggled with various mental health issues. And I loved her dearly. She was, good person in my life. And it was during a time in my life when I was struggling. And so she was someone who was used to taking a lot of like medication for mental health and things like that. And I, in full honesty, grew up like not doing that or having that in my life really. And she convinced me to kind of go to the doctor and tell the doctor like, hey, I'm dealing with this stuff. I'm wondering if I can get some medication to help me get through it, just to kind of take the edge off. And I asked the doctor, and I'll never forget what he said. And he sat down, he said, John, that's my name is John. He said, why are you depressed? And I told him, I said, well, I'm kind of not happy with my job right now. And, I'm just really struggling basically. And he goes, because I don't know if you really need medication. You need a new job. And like that really, I think, was like a profound moment in my life. And to be honest with you, it was probably a year after that where Teen Truth really hit the ground running. And then all that stuff I was struggling with went away, because like all of a sudden I was doing what I love to do. And I was on stage working with kids and a lot of adrenaline, a lot of fun. And I think like that's the thing that I've taken away is, and I ask my clients, do you know why you're feeling this way? Can you put words to it? Once I can get a client to put words to it and name it, then I can bring it in the room and talk about it. Now, in the case of my ex-girlfriend that I mentioned, because of some of her struggles and trauma in her past and things that she was going through, I think she would struggle to name that. Like she would struggle with that. And so you're asking kind of like what the first point is. And I used the word earlier, situational.
Mm-hmm.
And even with the client, I was on the phone with a client the other day who was in some stressful situation. I said, okay, do you know why you're feeling this way? Yes, I do. Well, then I don't think you're crazy. She was like, am I crazy? I was like, well, I don't think you're crazy. Like you're going through a situation right now that's really freaking difficult. Like, and you're acting like a crazy person because it's really hard. And so like, hopefully I'm making sense, Vincent. Does that make sense? That there's kind of a yin and a yang there?
You absolutely are. Yes. Because it also goes to the fact where you hear people say, oh, I'm depressed. Oh, I'm depressed. I'm depressed. Oh, I have anxiety. Well, there's a difference between being sad or having a bad day, having a rough go, to being clinically depressed, needing medication, because I'm not going to say medication's good. I'm not going to say it's bad. I'm not a professional. But again, what works for some may not work for others.
Yeah. It's really going to be a case by case basis.
Yes,
I've had clients where it's really helped them. Like I personally view the medication, like, because I'm not an expert in that either. Like I'm just a therapist.
Yeah.
But I view it a little bit more like you were mentioning earlier, like if you break your arm, like I view it as that cast or that Band-Aid. It's like a bridge to kind of get you across where you need to be. I have one client where she was coming off of it and worried about it. And it was like, well, I asked her, I said, well, have you used medication all of your life? No, just right now. Well, did you have major episodes of depression in your 20s and early 30s? No, just right now. Well, then, for me as a therapist, I have no reason to believe that you're going to continue these major episodes of depression. Like, I think you're going to work through it. I think you've got a background and life experience that's going to work well for you. And the medication is maybe just kind of that bridge to get, and she was going through something that was very, very, I told you I do divorce recovery. So she was going through a divorce that was like really, really hard. Right. And so it is a case by case basis. But I really encourage you, if you're feeling something like that, to talk to a professional about it and allow the professional to pull out of you exactly what I'm saying. Like exactly like having those critical conversations is like the initial step of that mental health that we were talking about when I gave the example of being in the gym with the dumbbell.
Yeah. And thank you for encouraging the use of therapy. The worst that happens, everybody listening on, is you don't like it. You don't have to, there's no contract. You stay with a certain therapist. You can find a new therapist, which happened to me at one point. I bounced around and I found someone that worked with me when I was in therapy. But I am excited for this next one for you, JC. If you could pick only two, and I say just two because I want your most important answers here, what were the two most important things that our listeners can do on both a daily or short-term basis and a long-term basis to improve their overall mental health? And let's start with the short term.
All right. Back me in a corner there. That's what I like. I think the two most important things on the short term basis, I think is those little things like I was mentioned earlier, like going to the gym. Research has proven that people that are active, people that are exercising, people that are doing yoga, that are going for walks, going on hikes, people that are moving their body usually feel better. They feel happier. And so I really encourage clients, like in that short-term strategy they're talking about, I believe it's like action-oriented. So it doesn't need to be going to the gym. Like you might be listening to this saying like, JC, I haven't stepped in a gym ever, and that's totally cool. But it's like, it's what I feel is important is action-oriented movement in relation to your body, right? So the clients I see in my office that are sedentary and don't take action in their life, they have a slower healing process.
I agree.
Where the clients that like even for me, like I went through something difficult where I moved out here to Austin when that was happening too. And I found yoga. I had never, ever done yoga in my life and never thought I would do yoga in my life. But I found a great teacher with a great studio. I had a really good experience. It made me stronger than I've probably ever been. And I fell in love with yoga. And so that's just an example of like taking action in my life, finding something unique that really helped, and is now a strategy that I use on a weekly basis, at least, to kind of center myself. And so that's what worked for me. And Vincent,
I could agree with all those,
yeah,
because I know for when I don't go to the gym, and you don't have to, people think they hear gym, you don't have to lift heavy weights. You can go for a walk, what have you. If I don't need to get 30 minutes of just doing something like that a day, I'm thinking about things I shouldn't be thinking about, over stressing about things that don't need to be stressed about. And also being goal oriented, I think, is very important. Find something, go after it, because it pushes you and it keeps you in that uplifting, optimistic, positive outlook. So I love those answers so far.
Yeah, moving your body is just so important. And then on a long-term basis, like what I've found in my experience working in schools and working with therapy clients is no matter what we talked about the situational stuff, no matter what the situation is that's causing the internal issues, it usually always comes down to relationships. That's what I've noticed. It comes down to relationships in their life, whether it's at school, at home, even sometimes relationships in their past. And I found it takes some work. But long term, if you're able to kind of recalibrate those relationships and get a different momentum moving in those relationships, that's when a lot of times the internal stress kind of subsides. And so, long term, I've had clients, like one guy I worked with that was very kind of disconnected from his father, right? And he carried a lot of issues with that. And, we had to talk that through. And it was conversations with his father that ended up kind of helping him get through it. I have another teenager, a really good one. I have a teenager that came to me, parents signed him up because of technology addiction. And that's like, no, we want you to work with him on technology addiction. You know how I solved that issue for that kid, Vincent?
Take his phone.
Turns out he wanted a better relationship with his father. Had nothing to do with his phone or his computer or his video games. When we got deep down into it, he wanted a better relationship with his dad. And once we kind of hit that nugget and I brought the dad into session, boom, like literally, like the thing evaporated.
So he was using technology as his outlet for the situation.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was basically something he was going to kind of waste time, obviously, and deal with certain things. But a more positive relationship with his dad kind of helped him be more resilient and stronger and more action oriented. And it's cool. I mean, like, we had many great sessions and eventually just kind of terminated with him, because it was like, hey man, I don't think you need to come to counseling every week right now. Like, you call me when you need help and I'll be there for you. You're doing a great job. He's an 8th grader, and keep up the good work. And so that's just a good example of like how critical relationships are to our mental health. And for me as a marriage and family therapist, like that's what they trained me to do, right? Like, think about psychology since the beginning of time. Like Sigmund Freud, it was about lay down on the couch and tell me what's wrong with you, and how your parents screwed you up, right? Marriage and family therapists, we're trained to look at the system around you and try to recalibrate that system, because we believe mental health is kind of like a product of that system.
Yes.
That would be a really great example. That teenager was depressed, struggling with technology addiction. But once I was able to kind of recalibrate things in the family, in the home, well, then that issue kind of subsided. And so that's the work that we do as marriage and family therapists. So, if you're looking for a counselor, looking for a therapist, realize, like you said, Vincent, all of us are different. We come with different backgrounds and different skill sets.
Exactly.
I often tell clients, getting a therapist is kind of like dating. Like, it's just not always going to be a good match. And I've had clients where you're in the office and you're like, I don't know if this is going to be a good match. And other clients are like, JC, I'm so thankful I found you. It was such a great match. And so, that's something to think about as well as you start working on your mental health and possibly working with a counselor or a therapist.
JC, great overall answer again. But now let's look into the future a little bit. What are some ways you plan on raising awareness for the importance of mental health through your work? I'm excited to learn.
Yeah. Well, Vincent, it's funny because I just finished our little company retreat that we went on this week. And I'll be honest with you right now, Vincent, it's just like continuing what we're doing. Like, yes. I really feel like Teen Truth and the work that we've done, like our foundation is set up pretty good right now.
I would agree.
Programs are set up pretty good. The work we're doing is pretty solid. So for me, it's just like being on shows like this with you and getting out there and just sharing the message and, and letting kids know that it's important to tell their truth. Talking to adults about the important, like you said, the modeling and the relationship building that they can do with teenagers. And so we'll just continue to kind of drive that ship down that lane, and work to build positive relationships on campus and in the lives of students. And so I think that's really what we're doing. We're just kind of just put the pedal to the metal, right? We're just trying to hit the gas on that a little bit and keep doing what we're doing.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited to see what else you have in store for us, but I think it's a great time to head into the spotlight story. And on each week's episode, I share a mental health story of someone who is famous because I want to let you, the listeners, know you are not alone. I want you to understand that even though someone looks like they're healthy from the outside, they may not be on the inside too. And I will introduce the mental health related story of another male who is breaking mental health stigmas in Shawn Mendes. Mendes is an extremely popular singer-songwriter from Canada. I would like to share some comments he made that may resonate with a few of you listening on. He said, quote, "It was kind of something that hit me within the last year. Before that, growing up, I was a pretty calm kid, super steady," when describing his secret struggle with anxiety. He went on to add, "I knew people who had suffered from anxiety and found it kind of hard to understand. But then when it hits you, you're like, oh my God, what is this? This is crazy." He also shared the reason he wrote the song In My Blood was to be like, at the end, it's not in my blood to do that. JC, what do you take away from this story?
Well, I think his story, I kind of take two things away from his story. Is it sounded like he had a fairly good childhood. Like he said, he's a pretty calm kid. He was super steady. And I had a pretty good childhood as well. And one thing I've kind of noticed with people that have had that secure upbringing that maybe I haven't had to deal with as much difficulty and adversity is sometimes we struggle with that a little bit as adults because we're like not used to it. Like, again, going back to the muscle analogy, like we haven't developed those muscles to like overcome adversity. And it sounds like he hit a difficult patch in his life where, anxiety really cropped up for him and he didn't really know how to handle it. And so I think what I really take away from the story is like, you never know what's going to happen in your life. And just doing the small things like we talked about earlier, whether it's journaling, yoga, just having these practices in your life that help you reset. Like you said, Vincent, like when you go to the gym, it just kind of resets you a little bit, right? Having things in your life that can kind of do that for you is just so important because, I mean, look at COVID, man. None of us before March 2020 thought that we'd be where we are today. And, you never know when it's going to come. So having some of those skills in place and opportunities in place are just so important. So I don't know, that's kind of my thoughts on it.
I agree. And that was one of my goals with Mr. Lanci Talks Mental Health. My new book is to give people those resources right in front of them and give them tangible tips where if something like COVID, there are some ways to ease that difficulty. But JC, thank you so much for coming on another podcast episode. I know the listeners are going to see all the value in your show. Of course, I loved how you compared the yoga to the bicep curl. You need to take your mental health in the same category as your physical health. I loved your example with Columbine. Well, maybe could a counselor have helped him? So that I want to encourage you listening on, students listening on, just speak to someone. There's no shame in it, and it can only improve things. And I also enjoy how you stressed having conversations like we're talking about. It is so important just to do so, but it is time for the last word. And I also do this on my other podcast series, What It's Really Like to Be an Entrepreneur, because I want the listeners to really get to know all of the guests I bring on. Is there something that you would like to share with everyone that we did not touch on yet today?
I mean, I think we covered a lot, Vincent, so I'm not going to hold people too much longer here. But the one element that I guess we didn't touch on is just the element of hope. I think with COVID or with a lot of times, like I mentioned, some of the people I receive in divorce recovery, they lack a little bit of hope. They lack a little bit of vision and foresight. And so I think it's important for us all to have that hope. Like sometimes all we need is that hope. And another word that maybe is kind of similar to hope is the word purpose. I've found that when we have a purpose, when we have something we're driving towards, it just enables us to overcome things. Like we're not just floating around like by the breeze. We've got some direction in our life. And so that's a lot of the work that I do as a counselor. I'm very solution focused. So it's like, all right, like I said, I get my clients to name the problem. And then I just try to figure out with them like how to solve it. And that's really our focus. And so having that purpose, having that hope that they can work through it, I think is a huge key to like their progress. Like my goal, like the craziest thing about being a counselor is your goal is to work yourself out of a job. Like, you know, you want this person to come to you and you want to get them to the point where they don't have to come back. Right. Yep. And so like, that's the process I kind of put people through. And I've seen it's been pretty helpful because it's very action oriented. It's very solution focused. And I had a kid yesterday even just tell me, he's like, what I like about you is like, you just help me find the solutions. You don't sit around and make me do stupid games is what he said. It's
well,
like,
a lot of people like to dwell on their problems or in certain cases complain about them, but very few are actually focused on figuring it out, finding the solution.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if anyone wants to steal this from me, like what I used to, the word I used to use or love to use, I should say, is the word wonder. And that's how I respond to clients. Like I want to hear their problem. I want to know what they're going through. I want to feel their pain, but then I just want to drop this bomb in there and just say, I wonder how you're going to get through it. Or I wonder how you've gotten through it in the past. And what that word does, it's a very soft word that changes the conversation from problem focused to solution focused. And it can be very beautiful. So yeah, I think that's the final word for me. So good luck, everybody out there.
It's a great last word. Would you mind now, please, taking the time to share your professional social media, the website, ways for our listeners to either request your services or follow your endeavors?
Definitely. A few things. You can find me on Facebook or LinkedIn, just JC Pohl. You can find Teen Truth at teentruth.net, or you can find me at jcpohl.com. And the last thing, I just want to offer a free gift, Vincent, while we're on here talking about mental health. I did write a book called Building Resilient Students from the Inside Out. And I wanted to offer just the first 2 chapters for free to all of your listeners, just anyone out there listening that might want to learn a little bit more about building resilient students. So if you go to teentruth.net/resilient students, so that's teentruth.net/resilient students, you can enter in your email address and we'll send you the first 2 chapters of the book completely free. No strings attached. It's just my gift to you for spending that time with us today. And in those first 2 chapters, we talk about the importance of charismatic adults and how they can really be a pivotal element for teenagers becoming resilient. So thanks for the opportunity, Vincent, and thanks for everybody who tuned in today.
Be sure to check out all of that great content. And it is social media time for the show, and we're on whichever platform you like to use. We're at A Mental Health Break on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. And on Twitter, we're at PodcastsByLanci. So you have updates from this show and what it's really like to be an entrepreneur. Of course, my handles are at Vincent A. Lanci for all social media and YouTube, and my website is vincentalanci.com. If you check out my books, DM me. I would love to hear from you all. We have Mr. Lanci Talks Mental Health, Left for Dead, A Story of Redemption, and How to Transform Your Mindset When the Norm is Changed. All are on my website now. If you enjoyed today's episode, please continue listening and rate A Mental Health Break 5 stars. I work hard to find value delivering guests for you on each episode. Thank you for listening, and I will see you all on the next episode of A Mental Health Break.